Hello and welcome to Fresh Perspectives. My name is Gail, and my guest today is Dr. Earl Freling, whose office is in Ripley, New York. I don't know that I've ever asked you this before on any of my episodes, but how can people get a hold of you if they need you?
Oh, they can just call me. You can find me on Facebook. I have a page on there too, and my number there is also posted. Mm-hmm. I have quite a few people that actually contact me through instant messaging and through my Facebook. That works very well. Otherwise, I'm still listed in the phone book if anybody actually uses phone books anymore.
I do. I know a lot of people that don't, and some of them work here at the studio. But okay, well, thank you for agreeing to come on again.
My pleasure.
Okay, now, so like maybe 6 and 7 years ago and like that, I started having some experiences with bats. Where I would see them out and about during the daytime hours on some bright sunny days. And it was kind of scaring me. Like one time, one came just flying through my kitchen right after I ate lunch on a day that I was home during the day. And another time, I found one on a bright sunny day out on the porch steps, sitting there. And another time, and this was on the 4th of July, the next incident I'm going to mention, we were getting ready to go outside to eat some watermelon, and the dog and the cat were out on the porch, and all of a sudden, just before we opened the door, I saw the dog jump up. Kind of excited like, and when Carl opened the door to go out through the porch, a bat came flying in from outside. And you know, I mean, it was beginning to scare me because you hear that something is maybe wrong with them if they're out and about, especially on a sunny day.
Could be. And you see that with certain animals that are normally nocturnal. They'll, if they have something wrong, such as rabies, for instance.
Yeah, that's where I'm headed with this.
Raccoons, skunks,
yeah, raccoons.
such a matter.
And although I did go to a presentation on bats a few years ago one time, and this one person that was speaking about them said that, you know, some of the teenage ones, you know, who don't know how they're supposed to do things yet, you know, sometimes that'll happen with them. And
as with humans.
Yeah. Yeah, my son Henry was just telling us a couple days ago about an experience he had with a bat getting in his house. Last year, I think he said it was. And so anyways, and he was describing what he did to get it out of the house and everything. And then also, it seems like every year you hear about something in the newspaper about somebody getting attacked by a rabid raccoon or something like that.
Yes.
And you know, I was starting to get kind of nervous about rabies because you usually always die if you actually,
It's untreated.
if it's
can be
not,
very
if
dangerous.
you don't know it and that you've got it, that you can die. So anyway, I asked a nurse practitioner back around about that time, why don't we get vaccinated for rabies? I was explaining this to her, you know, and she didn't really answer my question.
Just like our pets.
Yeah, because we always get our pets vaccinated for
Certainly.
rabies. I mean, I think you legally have to, don't you?
Yes. In order to get a license, you have to have your pet, dogs in particular, vaccinated.
Yeah.
Of course, they don't have a licensure for cats yet. We won't give them any ideas there, but
Oh yeah, let's not give them any ideas.
yes, but it's a good idea to get your animals vaccinated for rabies, especially a cat. If they're an outside cat, and for instance, if they are catching mice or
Right.
bats,
Right.
which does happen.
Yeah, I guess mice. I heard that recently that mice get rabies sometimes.
Certainly, just about any mammal can get rabies if
yeah.
conditions.
Yeah.
Skunks, for instance, are very common vectors for rabies.
Oh, are they
Even
really?
though they don't necessarily get attacked, but because they spray, the least likely animal to have rabies is a porcupine, because nothing can bite it.
Oh, right. Well, something that's making a comeback in the area, though, is an animal called a fisher.
Yes.
And apparently they are able to, because they're able to somehow, they have a way they can, that they can get at the porcupine's stomach. So
Right.
I think a fisher can.
Yeah. And they're a very aggressive animal.
Yeah, well,
Very dangerous.
one time, are they dangerous to
Oh, yeah.
humans?
They can be, yeah.
One time, this might be several years ago, I can't remember exactly how long ago, but one morning when I was getting ready to go someplace, it sounded like something running back and forth horizontally on the side of the house, horizontally to the ground. And I couldn't figure out what that would be. And I went to the kitchen window to try to see if I could see, what it was. And this weird-looking black animal all of a sudden came and looked in the window at me. And I figure that must have been a fisher, because what else would it be? It wasn't a squirrel.
Yes.
It had the weirdest-looking toenails, too.
They're basically a giant weasel. They're the
Is that what it is, a
largest
giant
of the weasel
weasel
family.
family?
The females only get up to about 15 pounds, but the males can reach 45 pounds.
Oh
They're
my gosh, that is huge,
They're good
isn't it?
size. They're good size.
Yeah.
They could kill even a large dog.
Oh, really?
They're very
Oh my
aggressive
gosh.
and very territorial.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, so they'll fight with other kinds of animals
yes.
over territory, not just
Yes.
their own?
Correct.
Oh, that's scary. Well, anyway, the reason I brought the subject up is I've always wondered why we only get vaccinated for rabies if we know we've been bitten by a rabid animal. Do you know what the reason for that is?
Well, I think probably because it is so rare that people
in
actually
humans.
get it. Yes. So probably they feel that it's not necessary to vaccinate. But from what I understand, the treatment for rabies is quite painful and takes quite a bit of numerous injections into the abdomen. Whatever course they're taking, whether it's an interferon type of injection, it's not necessarily a vaccine per se or antidote.
Yeah, I've just always wondered about that. But I know a cousin of mine, one winter when he was getting Christmas decorations out of his attic to decorate their Christmas tree, he brought it down from the attic, and then a bat came flying out of it. So I think he killed the bat and then had it taken to be tested for rabies, and it tested positive for rabies. So anyways, they wound up having to do whatever it was that you have to do. Not that they had gotten bit, but they were told that the bat some of its saliva may have been left laying around the house, and they could, they might maybe pick up the virus from that.
I suppose that's possible,
and
yes.
so they wound up having to put up with
The treatments
as
a precaution.
Yeah, as a preventative to make sure, eventually the virus, if it was around in the house, would die off. But anyway, his daughter now has always been really terrified of bats ever since, you know.
With good reason.
So anyways, that was the first thing I wanted to touch on, just because I wanted to know if you knew what the reason was, but nobody's ever told you anything.
No,
like
other
that.
than, I think, just that it's rather rare that people get bitten by bats, and we have quite a few of them around here, especially in the Mayville region with the lake flies, and they're a very good thing to have around as long as they're not in your house.
Oh, right, right. Somebody once told me that they actually would import bats to have at the Chautauqua Institution.
Oh, that wouldn't surprise me.
They love them over
I
there.
know they quite often put up houses for the bats that to encourage them, just to combat the lake flies. A bat can consume a large number of lake flies or mosquitoes in a single night, and that's a good thing to have.
As long as they don't get rabies.
And as long as they're not in your house.
Yeah, like some people will tell me, you know, oh, they won't hurt you. Well, they will if they have rabies.
Yes,
if they have rabies.
If you've ever seen the teeth on them, they are nasty.
If they will hurt you if they have rabies, they will probably definitely.
Yes.
I guess the reason animals foam at the mouth when they get rabies is something about the disease makes it impossible. Once you come down with the symptoms, it makes it impossible for you to swallow. So you get a buildup of saliva and it starts foaming out of the mouth. So
it could be part of that, yes. Yeah, they also refer to it as hydrophobia, which they have
a fear of water.
Fear of water. Yes.
When you have rabies.
Yes.
Yeah.
And possibly because they can't swallow the water, or and the saliva builds up.
Well, it probably affects them mentally.
Yes.
You know.
And the virus which is a street virus, has a tendency to reside within the salivary glands as well as the bloodstream body fluids.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, okay. Now we've talked about that, we can move along to our next topic, which I need Chris to bring up the pictures of. Okay, now, that first one is pronounced the iliopsoas muscle
Correct.
complex.
Yes.
Okay. What does it attach to?
Well, basically, the origin of the muscle is part of the lumbar spine, but also along the inner side of the iliac crest, or the pelvic bone. And that's joined together at the sacroiliac joint. They extend and connect to the anterior part of the femur bone, which is your long thigh bone. And quite often, this can be a problematic area, especially with some type of pelvic distortion pattern, sacroiliac syndrome. The iliopsoas muscle can go into spasm and create a multitude of problems. Occasionally, people will strain the iliopsoas muscle, which can induce that sort of condition, and it can mimic many other problems. Sometimes people think they have an appendicitis.
Oh, really?
Because of the pain associated with the iliopsoas muscle.
Well, according to the diaphragm there, it only shows it on the one side, but it's actually on both sides.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes. Sometimes people doing sit-up exercises, for instance, improperly with the legs straight rather than bent, will overwork the iliopsoas muscle, and it will go into spasm, create a lot of lower back pain, pelvic pain. So when you bend your knees, when you do a sit-up, it eliminates the iliopsoas muscle. So that in itself helps so that you're not overworking that. But tight iliopsoas muscle also can pull the lumbar spine forward and basically induce what's called an anterior pelvis, which puts a lot of strain on the lower vertebrae in the lumbar spine, the discs, and other connective tissues.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Okay. What kind of things can we do to keep it healthy?
Well, as I touched on before, doing your sit-ups to strengthen your core muscles will take the pressure off of that and eliminate the use of the iliopsoas muscle.
Okay.
Some stretches, some of your yoga stretches probably work very well to help stretch that out.
Well, I've heard that that's part of the reason for yoga exercises is to help keep the iliopsoas muscles stretched to the way they're supposed to be.
Yes. Sometimes people like to do straight leg raises. Those are, you're basically, that's not really incorporating the abdominal muscles as much as it is the iliopsoas muscle.
The straight leg
raises. Yeah. So you have to be very careful with some of those exercises. The iliopsoas, as I said, can, if you develop a trigger point in it, for instance, or it becomes spastic or inflamed, can mimic a problem with the abdominal compartment. It can mimic something as simple as an appendicitis or an ovarian cyst. I've seen that numerous times where people come in and they think they have a problem, but by palpating the iliopsoas muscle, I can usually
get it to relax or whatever it's supposed to do.
And,
yeah.
And differentiate between a appendicitis or ovarian cyst. So.
Okay. And it makes it possible for our bodies to, what does it, the iliopsoas muscle would have to have a purpose, so it makes it possible for our bodies to do certain things. And what are those things?
Well, basically when you're walking, you're incorporating the iliopsoas muscle. Every time you bring your lower extremity forward, that muscle contracts. The muscle gets plenty of a workout just from walking. So you really don't have to do anything else to that muscle. Quite often you'll see gymnasts, for instance, have a very tilted pelvis forward.
Oh, is that right?
And that's because of the iliopsoas muscle being very tight in your gymnast.
Is that a bad thing then?
It can be, yes. It can be.
Okay. And then going back to the diaphragm, the figure again, the figure number 2 is the diaphragm.
Yes.
And what does the diaphragm attach to? Where is it located in the body?
Well, that basically separates your thorax from your abdominal compartment. And the diaphragm is essential for breathing. If you don't have a diaphragm or the nerve supply to the diaphragm is impeded in any way, you're going to have problems breathing. And if the diaphragm becomes weak, you are prone to what is called a hiatal hernia, in which the abdominal contents can actually push up through the opening of the diaphragm into the thorax.
Oh, I
This is
see.
where you have people who have problems with
acid
reflux, GERD, as they refer to it, esophageal reflux, can all be attributed to a weak diaphragm. The diaphragm is actually innervated by nerves that come from the cervical spine, C3, 4, and 5 levels. And if subluxation of the cervical spine is present, it can cause a weakening of the diaphragm just from improper nerve supply or impinged nerve supply.
Okay. Now its main function in the body is for breathing, right?
Correct.
And to separate.
And to separate.
To separate those two parts of the body. Now I've heard of people having a ruptured diaphragm. Is that what a hiatal hernia is?
It can be part of it, yes. When the opening where the esophagus goes down through the diaphragm into the stomach, that can actually open up. Hiatal hernia or diaphragmatic hernia can be very serious. Sometimes it has to be corrected
by
surgically.
Surgery.
That's a very, very tricky operation.
Okay, and like as far as keeping it healthy, I guess yogic breathing exercises are
Correct.
supposed to be really
Yes.
good with the deep breathing, where
Yes.
you really, most of us, most of the time, are not taking in complete breaths.
Yes.
We have to, like with a yogic breath, you're pushing out, you're filling the lungs up from the very bottom.
Yes.
The
Diaphragmatic, or
Diaphragmatic
abdominal breathing. And that's something that we are actually born doing, is we breathe properly. If you observe an infant, for instance,
okay, okay.
they abdominal breathe. You'll see their stomach, abdominal compartment rise
stomach,
and descend.
The stomach will come right out
Yes.
when you do a complete diaphragmatic
But
breath.
for whatever reason, we start, as we get older, we tend to rely more on breathing through our chest. And that can create some problems down the road, but exercises such as in yoga or some types of meditation where you focus upon abdominal breathing rather than breathing through your chest can be very beneficial for the diaphragm as well as the abdomen and your overall oxygenation of your blood.
Oh yeah, and oxygenating our bodies is very important.
Yes,
too.
oxygen is good.
It's good to be oxygenated
Yes,
because I guess things like cancer, like thrive
In an anaerobic
on
environment.
an environment where there's a lack of oxygen.
Correct.
And I've heard that most of the people usually the people who have cancer have a deficiency of oxygen.
Yes.
And this is where I like to tell people not to drink carbonated beverages.
Okay.
Because they cause a deficiency of oxygen.
They can.
So now both the diaphragm and the iliopsoas muscle groups are both connected to the lumbar spine. And apparently, according to yoga experts, the lumbar spine is the body's center of gravity, stability, and movement.
It's a big part of it, for sure. And if you have weak abdominal musculature or weak diaphragm muscles, you lose supportive value in front of the spine, which can create all kinds of problems, weakening of the discs. There's a certain amount of what we call intra-abdominal pressure that is created between the abdominal muscles, the core muscles. You've probably heard people talk about strengthening core muscles, core strengthening exercises. You have oblique muscles in the abdomen. You have the straight muscles of the rectus abdominis muscles.
And then you have side body muscles that you have to keep strong
Correct.
too.
Iliopsoas are very important, as well as the iliocostalis muscles that run from the iliac crest up to the rib cage. Lots involved there. And if you lose that supportive value, you're putting more strain upon the lumbar spine, or the thoracolumbar spine in particular. You're going from an area of the spine that is supported by the rib cage to all of a sudden there's basically nothing. So if you don't have good muscle tone in your abdominal compartment, you're putting more strain on your lumbar spine. Those people are more prone to prolapsed discs, problems with the sacroiliac joint. I found that the biggest culprit of low back problems is that of weak abdominal musculature. So I quite often try to rehabilitate the abdominal muscles after we have adjusted the spine and pelvis and get it moving like it should biomechanically.
So people, somebody who throws their back out, they're probably going to respond better to the adjustments if their abdominal muscles are strong then.
Correct. but usually they're already weak by the time they get there.
Usually they are.
And couple that with someone being overweight, it can be a big problem too, which has a tendency to pull the pelvis forward, throwing it into extension and putting undue pressure upon the posterior elements of the spine and the discs. The nerves that emerge from the spine can become impinged, and it just sets up a whole cascade of problems that all stems from that of weak abdominal musculature.
Yeah, now there's a certain way, as far as good posture is concerned, there's a certain way that you can position your pelvic area
Correct.
to help prevent your back problems. Well, you know, we're taught to do it that way in yoga and so forth.
Yeah. Ergonomics has become a big problem. Just basically people who are confined to an office cubicle where they're sitting in a chair all day. We're really not designed to sit.
No.
And when you sit, you take a lot of pressure, tension off of the abdominal compartment, which basically causes some weakening. The posture itself is not good. You have 3 times the pressure on your vertebral discs than when you're seated as when you're standing.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
People need to get up and stretch a little bit when they're sitting. Also, in addition to the abdominal muscles becoming weak, the iliopsoas muscles can also become incorporated or shorten, and then when you do stand up, all of a sudden you're thrown into extension.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, so how do these there's something about these muscle groups affect our ability to express and suppress feelings and emotions too. Do you know anything about that?
Well, I think that
you'd probably, at least if you were having problems in these areas, you would probably at least be depressed.
Well, some chronic pain of any kind can cause depression. We have a tendency to store our emotions in certain muscle groups. People who are under a lot of stress, for instance, quite often clench their teeth, develop problems with the muscles of mastication that are involved with chewing. A lot of times people become very tense and the upper trapezius muscles can be very tight. The same nerve supplies the sternocleidomastoid muscles that run from the base of the skull down to the sternum. They can become very tight. We can manifest emotional problems, eventually become physical problems, and so that's a big concern.
Yeah, I just wondered about that. Now, the positioning of feet and legs. Now, when you're practicing yoga, I'm going to stand up here a minute. When you're practicing yoga, quite often you have your legs, well, you're kind of taught to have your feet pointing forward. And sometimes when I've been out in public, like doing grocery shopping or something, I will see some young person who would look perfectly beautiful, except that they're standing like this, with their feet turned out. Now, it's my understanding that you can cause problems with some of your joints if you do that.
Certainly. Especially if you're throwing your knees into extension. We see a lot of this with younger people anymore that are constantly on computers or gaming or cell phones, tablets. They do not enforce good postural habits in school like we used to have. Years ago, I remember, you probably remember too, in grade school there was actually a section on the report card for posture. They would grade you on your posture.
Oh, I don't.
Don't remember that.
I don't remember that.
I don't know. I don't know of anybody.
Maybe I didn't pay any attention
I don't know.
to it.
I don't know of anybody who ever failed for having bad posture, but I know a few people that probably should have, but I won't mention any names. But
No,
anyway, but quite often you see kids nowadays, they don't stand up straight. They're always slumped over, and that creates a lot of problems. You're not getting complete oxygenation. Your rib cage does not expand like it should. The diaphragm isn't working as it should, and you're not getting proper inspiration and oxygenation of your blood because of that. Something that's actually more of a cultural thing is that we're taught to stand that way. But in, for instance, Chinese cultures, it is more acceptable when you stand to bend your knees slightly.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
That takes the tension out of the iliopsoas muscle and relieves the forward extension and strain upon the lumbar spine.
Yeah, for people, learning like Middle Eastern belly dance, you're taught to not, really have the knees completely straight while you're doing the moves, and it actually helps to do the moves properly if you've got the knees slightly bent.
Right, and you're putting the strain on the quadriceps muscles or extensors of the thighs rather than on your iliopsoas and lumbar spine.
And I guess having a problem, an adjustment that you need in the lower back can cause knee pain, right?
Oh, certainly. Everything's connected.
Yep.
And if the pelvis is, for instance, tipped forward into an extension, which is quite often a problem, it could be from something as simple as not having good arch supports in your shoes. If the arches aren't supported, the feet have a tendency to turn in, as do the knees, and it goes right up the line.
Now, when you talk about the pelvis tilted forward, are you talking about the upper part of it tilting forward?
Correct.
Not the lower?
No, it's the upper, but it carries the spine with it.
Okay.
It puts a lot of pressure upon
Because there's a certain way, like in yoga, that you're told to tilt the pelvis, but that's from the lower side of it, and that helps to protect that.
Yes, takes the pressure off of the lumbar spine, supportive elements.
Okay. Now, how does wearing high-heeled shoes affect a person's body?
Oh.
We were talking about Bill Kuick when we saw him in the beginning here. He's been on from time to time, and one time he demonstrated on Fresh Perspectives. He brought a friend and demonstrated a massage and all that, and then he was commenting on something about some people walk with their hips going up and down when they walk. Now, I'm assuming he means one goes up at a time,
Correct.
One side goes up at a time, and like that. And I kind of found myself wondering if those were the people that feel they have to wear those really high-heeled shoes. Some women's shoes in recent years have been like not just kind of, not the old-fashioned high-heeled shoes, but like 4 and 5 inch heels.
Yes.
And
and if they,
I can't imagine.
I would think it'd be a very easy way to sprain an ankle, or if they're high enough, you might fall to your death.
I know.
But what happens with that, a number of things, is when you have the high heels on, and from what I understand, I really don't know this, but the reason why a lot of women will wear the high heels is because it makes them walk
a certain way. Supposedly it makes them look sexy or something.
Yeah. I never
but
did,
but I remember this one yoga teacher that I used to watch on television. I'd exercise with her program. This was many years ago, like when I was in my late 20s and early 30s, and it was a Canadian channel. back when we could get Canadian channels on TV. And her name was Corrine Zebroff, and she always used to say that when you wear high heels, it causes the muscles in the calves of your legs to become shortened.
Correct. Especially if you wear them all the time. You know, people who have worked in an office setting and always wore high heels, the Achilles tendon will actually contract. I've heard of cases where after women who work in such a setting retire, they have a real problem adjusting back to a flat shoe, simply for that reason. Also, the fact that when you are wearing a high heel, you're automatically throwing your pelvis into extension, which puts a lot more pressure on the lower back and the hips.
So you have a lot more back problems if you wear high-heeled shoes all the time.
All the time.
And I remember when I was a kid in the 1950s and 1960s. Now everybody knows how old I am. They already know, I told them. But anyway, I remember the teachers and the women that worked in the offices at the school and like that, they always wore high-heeled, pointy-toed shoes. And one of these women, one time in more recent years, I remember seeing her with a pair of sandals on one time. And at first glance, I thought it looked like she had a missing toe or something. But literally, some of her toes were crisscrossed over like that. Well, anyway, there was this coach for the boys' gym classes who actually used to have classes for kids with flat feet at the school. I remember in first grade, we were all made to go to the gymnasium and take our shoes and socks off so he could look at our feet. And those of us that did not have flat feet got sent back to the classroom, and the ones that had flat feet got kept back for their first class in helping to remedy their foot problems.
That's good.
And but anyways, I remember noticing that, and then I mentioned it to this same man that I was just mentioning, and how her toes look, and he said, "Oh, those are called hammer toes."
They can be hammer toes, usually when the metatarsal head will drop down long enough. The phalanges of the feet, or the toes, have a tendency to curl up as the metatarsal heads push down. You're putting a lot more pressure on the metatarsal heads when the heel is elevated. Combine that with a pointed toe, and you're kind of scrunching things together. It's a good recipe for bunions, hammer toes, metatarsalgia, plantar fasciitis. It can be a real mess.
Yeah, I heard a few years ago, I heard this one young woman mentioning to another person something about, she had some high-heeled shoes on, and she was even walking up and down the street and everything in them, and I heard her say something about, I want to enjoy wearing these while I'm still young enough, and I'm thinking, yeah, I didn't say anything. But I'm thinking, yeah, you're going to wish you hadn't when you do get older, you know.
Yeah, they create a lot
and
of
if
problems.
you're not used to wearing them, your feet, and then you do wear higher-heeled shoes, like to go spend a day at a wedding or something, your feet get awfully tired and achy by the end of the day.
I'm sure. That's a lot of undue pressure upon the feet. And the feet are basically the base of our spine. Anything that happens in the feet transcends to the spine.
All the way up through the
Yep.
entire body,
Correct.
right? So I've got a DVD at home that I use from time to time. That is the whole exercise DVD is exercises you can do for your feet, and after I do these exercises, my feet feel amazing right after.
I'm sure.
Right after doing these exercises.
We're putting a lot of pressure on our feet, and you know, if you work any capacity where you're on your feet for long periods of time, it's important to have
good, comfortable
shoes,
shoes that
fit.
that fit good and
Yes, and that, they say
hold your feet in the proper
correct.
position and everything.
You know, 99% of us are born with perfect feet.
Uh-huh.
By the time we're 12 years old, 90% of us have problems with our feet.
And that's awfully young to be having
that's an actual
problems with our feet.
statistic
Yeah.
from the American Podiatric Society.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, the problem is now, years ago, I'm sure you remember when you'd go to a shoe store, they would fit you.
They would measure they'd measure your feet
Yeah,
before they
width.
even got out any shoes for you to
Correct.
try
Width
on.
as well as length. And the problem is now that most shoes, depending on where they're made, they're not necessarily available in a wider size. So if you have a wide foot or a problem already with bunions, for instance, and you are looking for a shoe that's going to fit you, if you end up buying a shoe that is longer in order to get the width that you need. And the problem with that is that the foot will flex in the wrong point.
Oh,
so people
okay.
start putting more pressure upon the metatarsals. If you don't have proper arch supports, you can start developing plantar fasciitis, which can end up causing heel spurs. So that's a big problem. Wearing good shoes, good quality shoe,
Well,
is important.
sometimes people really want a certain style, but that style might not be right for your foot.
Correct.
You know, even if it's not a high-heeled shoe, it might not be the right one.
Certainly. But you know,
for your
people who
foot.
are on their feet a lot, such as chiropractors or nurses, for instance, quite often, you know, people who work in that capacity will have a good shoe with a good
Oh, yeah,
supportive
well,
arch. It's
yeah,
very
oh,
important.
yeah.
And not only to support the longitudinal arch, the long arch of the foot, but also across the base of the toes. It's important to have what's called a metatarsal arch or pad.
A metatarsal
Metatarsal
pad.
Correct.
Okay.
So when people buy arch supports, for instance, to put in their shoes, I quite often recommend that you get a full length one. Don't just get a 3/4 length. You need that extra
A
support.
3/4 length
Yeah,
metatarsal
you want a
pad.
full length one that will support the metatarsal arch as well as the longitudinal arch.
Yeah, I know you see advertising for something called the Good Feet store. Do you know anything about that?
I've heard of such where they will actually fit you for a shoe that's going to accommodate your particular condition that you might have with your feet, and that's good. That's a good thing. I'm sure they're pricey, but
Oh, I suppose.
consider the long-term effect of wearing improper fitting shoes versus
Yeah.
buying a good shoe to begin with. Work boots, for instance, if you're going to be working in that capacity on concrete, or it's a good idea to have good support. Sometimes, you know, people like to have a steel toe or a tarsal shield on top in case they drop something on their foot.
Oh, yeah, in certain lines of work,
Certainly.
they have to wear those to protect their feet.
Yes.
I know somebody who works at one of those Amazon warehouses, and she says they have to wear, they're required to wear shoes that cover their entire foot.
Correct.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. It always makes me cringe when someone wants to go for a hike and they're wearing sandals or something, or they're going to be cutting firewood or something.
you don't want to wear
No,
sandals to cut
You want
firewood.
something that's going to come up to your knees practically, protect your shins from
Yeah.
splitting firewood. Or,
Yeah,
nothing.
yeah.
Nothing makes you say mean things when you have a nice piece of firewood hit you in the shin or land on your foot.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I meant to mention this at the beginning of the program, but when Earl first walked into the studio today, before we started recording the program, I saw that he was dressed completely in black. And So I told him he was wearing his Johnny Cash outfit. So we got into a bit of a conversation about Johnny Cash. And would you want to tell the viewing audience about what he said the reason was that he always wore black?
He wore black in honor of people who were incarcerated. He had a soft heart for prisoners. He spent some time in prison himself for other things, that nothing dangerous. He didn't kill someone like he said he did in the song, but and he recorded, of course, the most famous album he did was at Folsom Prison live. So, but he wore that in honor of people who were incarcerated for whatever reason. But he was quite often asked, you know, are you going to a funeral? And he said, maybe I am. But
the reason when I saw Earl come into the studio wearing black is I have another friend who, whenever she wears an outfit that's both pants and shirt that are black, she always will say, I'm wearing my Johnny Cash outfit. So that's how the subject came up. When he walked in here, I said, I see that you're wearing your Johnny Cash outfit. So, okay, now, do you know anything about the vagus nerve? Do you know anything about that?
well, that vagus nerve is what's known as a cranial nerve.
A cranial nerve?
Cranial nerve. It emerges from the brain directly. It does not go through the spine per se.
Okay.
Cranial nerves will innervate certain parts of the body, such as the diaphragm or the muscles of chewing are all supplied by trigeminal nerve. Anything dealing with sensory sensation of the head and neck would be the trigeminal nerve, fifth cranial nerve. The spinal accessory nerve, the cranial nerve number 11, for instance, supplies the trapezius muscles and the muscles up front that I mentioned previously, the sternocleidomastoid muscles. The vagus nerve is kind of interesting. It does supply the diaphragm. It can also supply parts of the heart. So there's various functions, the laryngeal nerve, the olfactory nerve.
Yeah, it's a very important one, is my understanding.
Yes.
How I first heard of it was this teacher that I had years ago. Well, you know, through yoga, there are like more spiritual forms of yoga, like that you can meditate and all that. And I remember him saying something about when you're meditating and if you've had a Kundalini awakening, that you will have what's known as kriyas. It's kind of like a purification process that takes place. And he said something about sometimes when somebody like that is meditating and they're having kriyas, he said that sometimes a person's breathing can stop altogether, and that but that you wouldn't die or anything because internal breathing would take place through the vagus nerve.
The vagal response, yes.
So you know about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things that can occur, such as what is referred to as a diving reflex, which is part of
diving reflex? When you're diving into water?
Yeah, people have a tendency that'll stimulate the vagal nerve in such a way that their breathing will slow down, very much so like a dolphin, for instance.
Oh, okay.
And, you hear of people also having problems with the vagus nerve where if they get up on a ladder or something, all of a sudden they pass out.
Really?
It's not a good thing.
Now how would getting up on a ladder cause this to happen?
Probably just a combination of the balance that's involved and the elevation throws
Would
them
this
off
have anything
perception.
to do with a fear of heights or anything?
Not necessarily, but I suppose it could. Certainly, it could induce a fear of heights if
Okay.
you feel like you're going to pass out when you get up on a ladder.
Well, if they do pass out, they could fall off the ladder as a result of passing
certainly.
out.
Certainly.
So you hear of this happening to
yes.
people from
Yeah,
time
and
to
that's
time.
sometimes they have to. People who have a problem with the vagus nerve end up getting pacemakers because of it.
Okay.
Because of the all of a sudden the heart rate decreases, and they're not getting the blood supply to the brain. And of course, when your body achieves a more horizontal position, your brain's at the same level as the heart.
Okay,
So-
so is this caused by some other health issues then?
It can, yes, certainly. Yeah. Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
something that, if we maintain good health, I think that we can avoid things
Probably
like that.
avoid
Certainly.
those kinds of
Yeah.
problems. Yeah, yeah. Now I've noticed people when they come down with serious health problems, physically, like certain cardiac problems and like that, their speech and their mental state seems to be affected. I mean, I'm talking about stuff that I've witnessed,
Right.
in other people. And it just, I'm not sure what it is if just not at those times, if maybe not enough blood is going to
Correct.
the
Enough
brain.
oxygen to the brain.
And then they're having trouble speaking clearly and
Certainly.
so forth.
Certainly.
I'm talking about like AFib and stuff like
yes.
that. I mean,
Yep.
I've
AFib
these are
can-
just things that I've
Yep.
witnessed.
AFib can be very, very dangerous. People who can quite often have strokes because
Right,
of
right.
AFib.
Right. So, so it's good to eat a lot of plant-based foods then to help keep those arteries and things
Certainly.
cleaned out.
Certainly.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. We've got like 5.5 minutes here
Okay.
left. Is there something else that we should bring up? I probably kind of threw you for a
Well,
loop. You
that's all right.
probably weren't
Well,
expecting
that's
these.
fine, but
I
could,
asked some unusual
well,
questions.
they were good questions. They're always good questions.
Today.
But we, I think that we talked a little bit about people not using pesticides and herbicides and being a little more.
Oh, we were doing that. Oh, yeah,
considerate
we
of
were.
the
We were.
bees.
That was what we were talking about. That
Yeah.
before we actually started.
Before we started. And
Yeah,
that's-
we really should
Yeah,
because
that's a good point to make to people because
yeah.
without bees, we're in
there
trouble.
won't be
There
any.
won't be
There
anything.
won't be
food,
any us,
nothing.
will there?
No,
no.
They're kind of a limiting factor.
And it's not just the honeybees either. I've been
No.
hearing all of the
All the bees.
all of the
All the bees.
of the
Yeah.
pollinating insects.
Correct.
And
So people have to be very careful when using herbicides and pesticides and whatever on their plants because that goes right through the entire ecosystem. And if we kill off the bees, we're going to have a serious problem.
yeah,
But,
it'll be the end of the human
Right.
race. You
And I
know,
was
it's
mentioning-
like I hate to think about it. I don't like to think about it too much because it's out of my control. I don't use those toxic
neither do I.
things. So I'm doing as much as I can, and I
Yeah.
can bring
Yeah.
it to people's attention.
Certainly, everybody needs to do their part.
Yeah.
And it just as we were talking about my rhododendrons and wisteria being in bloom fully this year, and I notice all kinds of bees out there. I see bumblebees, I see honeybees, I see ground bees, all eating off these flowers, pollinating at the same time. So it can affect all of them.
There's even a-
hummingbirds. too.
There's even a certain part of China where I think it was Chairman Mao didn't like certain birds or something like that, so he ordered to have them all shot.
Mm.
And so because those birds weren't eating the bugs that would
Right.
damage the fruit trees, they the bugs just got out of hand.
Overpopulated.
So then they started using pesticides and
Created a bigger problem.
yeah, and then and now they have to hand pollinate these fruit trees. Can you imagine how much work
Oh, yeah.
that would be? You know, if we
certainly.
had to do
Well,
that
bees
ourselves.
can do a tremendous amount of work. I saw some statistics once where how many miles are traveled by bees in order to make a quart of honey. It's like a great number of bees traveling a total of
I know.
100,000 miles.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just
yeah.
unbelievable
Yeah,
how much goes into something
I guess
like that.
they travel from their own hive 2 miles or more.
Certainly.
So,
Yeah, so if you have, one bee, pollinating a flower a mile or two away and bringing that pollen back to the hive, that's a very small amount of honey that's being produced by one bee. So
Yeah,
numerous
yeah.
trips over a period of time, and
well, buckwheat honey is very dark in color. And I remember when Carl and I had bees, and we were doing the honey extracting from the spring and early honey flow one year, we noticed that normally the spring and early summer honey that we would get would be very light in color.
okay.
And well, anyway, we were extracting the honey at that time of the year one year, and we noticed that the honey was dark like buckwheat honey.
Right.
And I said to Carl, if I didn't know better, I would think that was buckwheat honey. Well, later in the year, somebody who lives about a mile from us was telling me that they had planted buckwheat in their field, and when it was blooming, it was completely covered with honeybees. And I'm going, oh, so that's where they
Yeah.
were. You know,
Okay.
they went over. Normally, we just had light-colored honey, and
Certainly. And of course, different plants pollinate or flower at different times. One of the last trees to actually flower is that of the black locust. And
Oh.
locust honey is,
Oh, yeah,
is
yeah.
very good too.
Oh,
and
yeah.
if someone has a tendency to be allergic to any type of pollen, it's good for them to use raw honey that's grown locally.
right.
And
It helps
it
with
has the antigens in it that help stimulate their immune system so that they're more immune to the allergens that are in the air at that particular time.
But getting back to the pesticides and the weed killers, I recently saw somebody a few weeks ago spraying weed killer. It was outside of an office building, and I saw somebody spraying. Now this was the ground there was mulched, so there weren't very many weeds coming up. It probably wouldn't have taken an awfully long time for this person to just pull them all up.
Certainly.
But he was with this big tank
Yeah.
spraying weed killer on
Yeah.
those weeds.
That's not good.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of problems with that too, with
Yeah.
people developing
Cancer.
Hodgkin's
Well-
lymphoma.
Well, this person was wearing shorts and a short sleeve T-shirt. It was a
not
hot day, and it's my understanding. I read a book a while back called "The World According to Monsanto,"
Uh-oh.
and the woman that wrote the book, she talks like, if you are going to use stuff like that, you're supposed to be wearing a hazmat suit
Probably should.
and special protective
Certainly.
footwear.
Can get absorbed
So-
into your skin and into your bloodstream.
Oh,
and,
yeah,
it can be very dangerous, let alone inhaling it.
But you try to explain this to some of these people, and you just don't get through to them.
No.
They act like you're speaking a foreign language or something, and
Pretty
you might
much.
as well be.
Pretty much.
Well, we've come to the end of another episode of Fresh Perspectives, and thank you for coming in to be interviewed again.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you for wearing your Johnny Cash outfit. And I'll see those of you in the viewing audience on the next episode.
Very good.